The Last Dragon by Dan Totheroh. Chapter 1. The Meadow and the Woodlot. The meadow and the adjoining woodlot were just right for valiant knights and fair ladies that springy Saturday afternoon. The meadow, soft and green and open, was right for the pavilion where the jousting match could take place. The big beech tree at the far, sun-rising end made such a delightful canopy over the king's judgment throne. And then after the bout, and the victorious knight was sent forth to do battle with the dragon, there was no more mysterious lurking place for a coily, fire-breathing beast than the shadowy woodlot, with its thick thimbleberry thicket, its black cave under the drippy spring shelf, and its close-grown oaks and maples. Indeed, there was always something terrifying to the children about the woodlot, even when the sun pierced through its wall of branches and leaves. The thimbleberry thicket had never been completely explored, and as for the oozy cave, well, Jonathan had ventured in as far as the first bend once, holding a bit of lighted candle, but the candle had been blown out, and he had rushed back to wide-eyed Peter and Janet Jane, who had stayed outside, peering in at the cave's black mouth. Jonathan, when he could get his breath, vowed he saw something strange around the bend, just before the candle flickered out. But Jonathan had a vivid imagination. It was he who made up all the plays and all the games that took place in the meadow and spilled over into the woodlot on Saturdays. And whether he really did see something strange around the bend or had just imagined it, Peter and Janet Jane could not be sure. Their mother said he had just imagined it, of course. What nonsense, Jonathan. You're too old to imagine such things. No wonder you were so poor in arithmetic this month. Jonathan really didn't see the connection. But that wasn't all about the woodlot. Peter, just 6, said he had heard a lion roaring in the thimbleberry thicket one stilly evening when he had gone back to find his lost cap in the meadow. But then Peter had a generous share of imagination too. Lions are only in Africa or in a circus, Janet Jane had said with feminine authority. But Peter replied in his well-known lisp, and with his head cocked, that there was no good reason why a lion couldn't be found in a thimbleberry thicket just as well as a badger or a chipmunk, and no amount of argument could convince him otherwise. Suppose lions didn't eat thimbleberries. Couldn't one have been in the thicket for some other reason? Or couldn't one have been there for no reason at all? Why should there always be a reason for things? Peter liked to go places for no reason. Maybe lions did too. Janet Jane pretended to be skeptical about the possibility of unknown and terrifying things lurking in the woodlot, until one morning early, having gone alone to the meadow to find mushroom buttons, she had seen a pixie stick his head out and grin broadly at her, wriggling his pointed ears like a rabbit at the same time. As Janet Jane stared at him, another pixie, wearing a pink sunbonnet, although he looked very much like a boy pixie, otherwise, bobbed up over the first pixie's shoulder and wriggled his long nose at her, just like a rabbit too. Then Janet Jane, who stood rooted to the spot with astonishment, declared that the two pixies began to sing, one in tenor and one in bass. Strangely enough, she remembered the words of the song. It went, butter and eggs, mushroom buttons and spider legs, mix them up and bake them brown, and you'll have a dish that will tempt the town. Now, this sounded suspicious to Jonathan, because Janet Jane was just learning to cook, and she was always singing recipes. and some of her proposed dishes were queer indeed. Therefore, it was strange that the 2 pixies she saw that early morning should sing recipes too. But Janet Jane said not at all. They were doing it just to poke fun at her. Pixies always poked fun anyhow. They were like brownies in that respect, and not at all like fairies who are too well brought up to poke fun. They sang the song through twice with a different tune each time, and after that Janet Jane managed to say "shoo" at the pixies, and they had vanished into the woodlot. Stooping to pick up her spilled mushroom basket, Janet Jane heard the rude fellows laughing at her. Oh, high, shrill laughter like a tree squirrel's bark. So you see, since Janet Jane was sure she had seen the pixies, and since Peter was sure he had seen the lion, and Jonathan was sure of something mysterious in the cave, around the first bend, there was no doubt that the woodlot was terrifying, and that the victorious knight who ventured into it with drawn wooden sword was almost sure to meet with adventure. It was just after breakfast that memorable Saturday morning when the children congregated in the soft green and open meadow sprinkled with cowslips and Johnny jump-ups. The little troop broke through the willow clump at the sun-setting end of the meadow and advanced solemnly in the direction of the big beech tree where the king's throne was already waiting. Jonathan and Billy Rose had fixed it after school on Friday. Their appearance scattered 2 chubby meadow mice into a desperate rush for their holes, and a flock of jenny wrens fled chittering, indignant at being disturbed, like little gray ladies at a tea party. There was quite an impressive procession advancing toward the king's throne. It had formed at the back door of the Baxter house, under the alert eyes of Grandma, watching from her upstairs window, and led by Jonathan, who of course was King Arthur no less. It wound through the rose garden, up the lane past the fish pond, over the creek bridge, through the truck garden, skirted the barn, and wriggling through the orchard it bobbed its 10 small heads to escape hitting the low branches of the willow clump, filing through a tunnel of green leaves to the open spaces of the dewy meadow. Yes, there were 10 in that procession, including the Irish setter named Nap, and the Airedale named Jerry. First, as we said before, there was Jonathan Baxter, King Arthur, dressed in the green and red portiere, with tassels, that had graced so many courtly ceremonies. The paper crown was on the kingly head, and in the royal hand was the oak wood scepter. Close on His Majesty's heels walked Her Majesty, Queen Guinevere, Janet Jane Baxter, resplendent in a long pink Mother Hubbard, one of Mrs. Baxter's cast-off garments, made theatrical and queenly by the silver paper stars that were pinned around the hem. Following her was Susan Oliver, 5 years old, bearing up the Queen's train, a child with eyes like mulberries, and a blue-black cloud of hair. She was pouting because she felt it was her turn to be the queen, and before the procession started it was very doubtful if she would play at all. The promise of queenship next Saturday finally quieted her, although she carried the train with a disdainful air that ruined the dignity of the queen, since it dragged the ground on one side and looped up too far on the other, showing the queen's long, spindly legs. After Susan Oliver came the 2 knights carrying their wooden swords, the chubby and blonde-curled Peter Baxter as Sir Lancelot, and the taller and older Billy Rose as Sir Galahad. They walked heads high, little noses up, wearing tin can armor with pride. Their broomstick horses were waiting for them, tied to saplings under the beech tree. Directly behind the knights was the public 3 small girls, Mary, Kath, and Polly, who were allowed to furnish their own costumes. Mary wore fluffy skirts like a bareback rider. Kath dragged a green train that rivaled the Queen's in length and caused a serious argument before the procession started. And Polly's 7 years were lost in a riding suit of her mother's, with boots that might have belonged to the famous Puss. The procession went twice around the meadow, stopping after the second circuit before the throne. King Arthur took his seat on a bench covered with a piece of red, white, and blue bunting, and his queen sat down beside him. The pouting Susan Oliver stood behind the queen and stared down at the top of her sandy head. Sandy hair wasn't nearly as nice for a queen as black hair. No, not nearly. Susan was supposed to fan the queen, but she had purposely forgotten the fan, which is as much as we'll say right here regarding Susan's disposition. The public of 3 scattered itself right and left of the throne and took postures of deep interest. After a silence, the king rose, and pushing back his crown that had worked down over his eyes, he spoke in tones that seemed to arise from his shoes. His chin pressed down against his throat to produce the effect. On with ye fight, and the victor will enter yonder forest to slew ye dragon who has been spreading terror and destruction throughout ye countryside. He sat down, and the queen smiled at him and said, Ye spoke well, O king. But the king did not answer her. A queen should never speak in public unless the king asked her a question, and then she should only reply in as few words as possible. At the king's command, the knights drew their swords and pointed them down to the ground and bowed very low to the king. Then they went to the saplings and untied their horses and mounted them. The fiery steeds leaped up and down and nearly threw the knights off, and the grass of the meadow was torn up by whirling feet. Quiet with ye horses, and on with ye fight, finally commanded the king, and at once, just as if they understood, the horses calmed down, and the knights drew apart, lifting their swords to wait for the final signal from King Arthur. King Arthur stood up, raised his hand, held it steady for a breathless moment, then let it drop quickly to his side. The public showed renewed interest. The blond and chubby knight, Sir Lancelot, made the first dash for his opponent. The wooden swords clashed, and the furious battle was on. Chapter 2. Peter enters the woodlot. Although the opponents were so unevenly matched, the fight was an exciting one, and not a bit one-sided. Small Peter fought with tiger ferocity and a definite show of assurance, for it had been arranged beforehand that Sir Lancelot should win. Galahad had won the Saturday before. With a sturdy lunge of his wooden sword, Peter unhorsed Billy Rose, who executed a trick fall and lay on his back, legs and arms in the air like some huge beetle turned over on its shell. Peter was on him in a moment, drove home the sword, pulled it out, and wiped away the gore on his sky-blue cape. Billy Rose did a spectacular death scene consisting of many kicks and contortions, adding much to the pleasure of the court and the public. It was a very long death scene, many minutes elapsing before Sir Galahad was quiet enough for the victorious Sir Lancelot to put his foot on the corpse and raise his sword to the king in salute. Go ye now into the forest, and find ye dragon that eats every week a maiden from our smiling village, commanded the great King Arthur, and Sir Lancelot bowed and stalked away toward the thick foliage of the woodlot. It was strange and terrifying that at the moment the chubby Peter reached the first maple, the one that breaks from the group and runs out into the meadow, a cloud, very black and heavy, passed over the sun, swimming up out of nowhere in an otherwise clear blue sky. A wind sighed through the maple leaves and whispered about something all through the thimbleberry thicket. The meadow darkened. Peter's hand tightened on his sword. He looked straight before him, then looked back. The court and the public and his rival, Sir Galahad, and the two dogs seemed to be miles and miles away, shadowy, blurred figures. Peter felt all alone in the big world and very small. What chance would he have against that lion he had heard roaring in the thicket that fearful evening? Oh, but he had his sword. Didn't he always want to do noble deeds? Didn't he envy Jonathan because Jonathan was a Boy Scout and did a good deed every day? To kill a lion would be a good deed, wouldn't it? That is, if the lion were aching to eat somebody right at that moment. Of course, if the lion were minding his own business, that would be different. Again, Peter looked forward, again looked back. King Arthur pointed with his scepter, and like a voice in a dream came his command. "Pause not, Sir Launcelot, go kill ye dragon." "All right, King," replied Peter in a tiny, trembly voice, and advanced a few more steps. He passed the maple, past the second maple, past the third. He was in the woodlot now, almost hidden from his companions. How very still it was. The wind had finished whispering to the thimbleberry thicket and had frisked away. Not a leaf stirred any place. Far off, Peter could hear the dripping of the spring. He thought of the black cave and of what Jonathan had told him about the strange something around the first bend. He paused, hearing his heart beating. To give himself courage, he spoke aloud, addressing himself in that well-known lisp. "Go on, Peter Baxter. Don't be scared. Don't you know that there's no more dragons? In the whole world, there's not a dragon any place. They're all dead." But even as he spoke, he doubted the truth of his words. If there were pixies, there could be dragons. Why should all the dragons be dead? People went on living, and dragons were dead. To small Peter, dragons seemed much more important than people. Yes, somehow, somewhere, dragons lived, and there was no reason to doubt that a dragon might live in the shadowy woodlot along with the lion and the pixies. Peter's feet ventured down the twisting path that would eventually arrive at the spring, and found himself safely past the thimbleberry thicket. That was a relief. Nothing had broken the silence save the barking of Jerry, the Airedale, and that was a comforting sound. Still, he wondered why Jerry and Nap had not followed him. They usually did. That was strange. Now, here was the spring and the drippy overhanging shelf of stones and black earth, all sewn together with tiny root threads, and right beyond the shelf was the entrance of the cave. Small Peter planted his stocky legs before the black hole, gulped once or twice, mustered up all his courage, and spoke in a squeaking lisp that was meant to be a rumbling growl. "Come forth, dragon." His wooden sword was clutched tightly in his little hand. Nothing happened, so Peter repeated his command. "Come forth, dragon." Still nothing happened, and becoming more bold, Peter stepped closer to the cave's mouth, thrust his sword into the hole, and rumbling it at last, cried for the third time, "Come forth, dragon." A long-drawn hissing sound answered him. He fell back. The hissing sound died. What was the matter with him? His imagination was doing strange things. He hadn't really heard a hissing sound. He hadn't really heard anything. Well, he had done his duty. He had called 3 times, and nothing had happened. He would return to the court and tell his story to the king. He was turning to go, when there issued from the hole a deep, deep sigh, then a yawn, and then another deep, deep sigh. Before Peter even had time to think, the deep, deep sigh ended in the most entrancing little chuckle, and two fiery eyes blazed in the hole. A long green nose was thrust slowly forth, followed by a broad and lazy smile. The eyes came into the daylight. The fire faded out of them. They were a soft, light blue, like the sky, and looked as if they had just opened from a deep and dreamless sleep. "Did you call me, little boy?" asked the dragon, as yards and yards of him, bright green like the meadow grass, oozed from the cave. Yes, sir, I did," gasped Peter. But I didn't think." The dragon continued to smile, oh so sweetly, and tears gathered in his light blue eyes. "You didn't think dragons lived anymore," he sighed, stretching out his great gold claws like a sleepy cat. "And you're almost right, because I am the last dragon in all the world." And two big tears, the size of cups of clear water, dropped to the ground.